introduce Maggie. She's been probably a staple in the Preservation Alliance world for 13 years now, but she also has worked for various nonprofits of all sizes during her long career in preservation, education, and museums. She has chaired the Wolfeboro Heritage Commission since 2016, which is most relevant to today's presentation. Maggie, I will now pass it over to you, and I will come back during question and answer time. All right?
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Just a quick reminder that if you haven't muted yourself, please do. That makes the recording that much better. And to say that we will send a follow-up email, and there'll be additional resources as well, a link to the recording, which will go up on our website. So thanks everybody for being here today. It's just great to have this audience and have a chance to speak with you. And now if I can advance my slides, that would be even better. I'm not going to read everything that I've put on the slides, but I love this quote, and I hope it resonates with you too. The Wolfeboro Heritage Commission was created on the heels of a townwide effort to rehabilitate our historic town hall, as opposed to abandoning it, selling it, tearing it down. And people who had volunteered for that effort wanted to come together and do more. Maybe your town is fortunate to be in a similar situation where there was some sort of a crisis or an opportunity that allowed you to capitalize on an awareness of preservation that hadn't perhaps been there before. I have to change my speaker view here for a second. And you may all want to do that, which is just to highlight the speaker. Okay, good. So heritage commissions are a component of local government, and they have town-wide scope. They adopt their own rules of procedure and follow municipal procedures and protocols, and also are enabled to accept and expend funds, acquire and manage property, hold preservation easements, and to also undertake the duties of a historic commission if they are so authorized. I think what's important is each commission decides what they want to do, and the work generally falls into three major categories of educational, advisory, and technical. Again, if you're acquiring properties, then you're going beyond those three major categories. In contrast, local historical societies are self-governed, not-for-profit groups, completely separate from town government for the most part, preserve and promote a community's history or the past. Heritage commissions are about helping to manage change in the present and for the future. So be clear about this when you're asked, and avoid overlap or conflicts, and work together with the historical society, but help people understand the distinction. If they offer a great lecture series or have a historic house plaque program or do walking tours, the Heritage Commission doesn't need to duplicate or compete. It might want to co-sponsor, might want to help in some way, but try to keep that separate. The other major point about Heritage Commissions that I think we always need to keep saying is they are not regulatory unless they do both Historic District and Heritage Commission duties. So I hear a lot from people who are in existing Heritage Commissions. Where do we begin and how do we get traction? We've had a real surge in popularity of Heritage Commissions in the last 10 years since I've been working in this field. So we've gone from numbers in the 20s to numbers in the 50s now, which is just great. You can create your own menu and choose what you wanted to get started on. And I'm going to go through what the statute allows and give you some examples of things that we've done in Wolfeboro or that I know have happened in other towns. But be patient. It takes a while to get rolling. Even writing of your rules of procedure can take up to a year. And it's really important to make sure you network with other town leaders, other nonprofit boards, give a few talks to local groups, find out what people care about that you could play a role in, what's under threat in your community, where are the opportunities. So be responsive to local needs, or take on a project of your own that you just can see needs doing, and that will also help you to get traction and visibility. The basis of all work of historic district commissions or heritage commissions is survey and inventory. That's the ideal. A lot of towns don't have a lot of survey work. I think that's handled by the Division of Historical Resources, and they would freely admit that survey work is really important, but there hasn't been enough of it done in the state. The Historical Society may have lists of historic homes and photo archives, which could be very helpful to you as a starting point for a townwide inventory. But typically, you're going to want to hire a preservation consultant for that. It took us a few years to feel like we had the wherewithal to propose a warrant article that brought us the money to do this. We received $17,000 to hire a preservation consultant, and the townwide or area forum is underway now. We hope that that information will be used by many town departments and many different people, and builds awareness of local historic resources for lots of people. The second thing that the statute says heritage commissions can do is conduct research and publish findings, including reports to establish the basis for a historic district and preparation of historic district ordinances within the municipality prior to its adoption. So this refers to the creation of a regulatory body with a similar sounding name. So the first thing you should do is really understand the difference between a heritage commission and a historic district commission, and make sure the people you're working with and talking to understand that too. Again, I said in some cities, there's one body that performs both functions, and the one that seems to be to have the highest visibility is often the regulatory component. In cities like Portsmouth, which is this map here, the Historic District Commission is very busy reviewing changes to properties, new buildings, etc. And so there's less emphasis on the kind of voluntary educational things that a heritage commission might do. But in small towns, I think historic districts and regulation can be a hard sell, and a heritage commission can help you get there at some point. The third thing, assist the planning board as requested in the development and review of those sections of the master plan which address historic and cultural resources. A chapter on historic resources is not required by the town's master plan, but every town must have a master plan, and a heritage commission can be a force for adding chapters. In Wolfeboro in 2019, we added a chapter on history, arts, and culture, and the Heritage Commission was very involved with that. We proposed some questions related to heritage and culture that went out on the townwide survey that then was synthesized into the final master plan. And one of the key statistics that came out of that survey is something we've been using a lot lately and over the years. 86% of the people in the town want to preserve rural character. So that's a great talking point for us. Also, if you have a heritage commission already and you kind of have an idea of what you want to do, then make sure those things get into the master plan so that the town has put its stamp of approval on what you want to do. It might be something like getting a historic marker, might be a survey of cultural landscapes, which you might not have done yet. It might be adding certain buildings to the state register. It might be doing an inventory of historic barns, whatever you think you want to do, and the town would accept in its master plan would be great to get in there. Master plans are typically updated every 10 years, and they should not sit on a shelf for a decade, but they should be documents that people are held accountable to, and reviewed annually, and we certainly do that. So we have a way to show, yes, we're making progress on this goal in the master plan. Heritage commissions can advise upon request local agencies and other local boards in their review of requests on matters affecting or potentially affecting cultural and historic resources. So definitely consult with selectmen regarding town-owned structures. You can testify in support of variances with the ZBA on behalf of historic resources. You can work with the planning board or conservation commission to bring historical expertise to the decision-making process. Some people have told me that they feel shut out of this, and that little two-word phrase, upon request, sometimes holds them back. I think you just need to network a lot and talk to people that you want to advise, bodies that you want to advise, and put yourself in front of them so that they know you do have some valuable input to be considered. We don't always alert the ZBA, for instance, if we're going to stand up at a meeting and weigh in. We probably should, but that our feedback, our votes at our meetings in support of a particular position do carry some weight. My photographs here show a building that was owned by the town that they wanted to tear down for a parking lot. It was a railroad freight house that had been purchased by the town, no longer used by the company that owned it. And we were a catalyst at a town meeting, a deliberative session, to say, let's change a warrant article to tear this down, to say, let's wait a year and see if we can find a tenant for this piece of our history, which stands next to our signature railroad station. And we were able to get that passed, and a tenant was found, and the building was rehabbed. One of the other things we do is annual monitoring of our the barn easements that are held by the town under RSA 79D. And many rural towns have these barn easements. The law says the selectmen are responsible for managing them. Our selectmen were grateful that the Heritage Commission stepped up and said, we'd do that. We were also part of a group developing architectural review standards for the planning board as part of site plan review. Heritage commissions can also be asked to advise state or federal agencies on project reviews, such as communication towers or equipment or highway projects. And now we're often consulted for those projects under part of Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. This is where prior survey work can be really helpful. Here in Wolfeboro, DOT is working on a state highway reconfiguration, and we were a consulting party in that public process. To our benefit, they carried out historic survey work along the route, and so that's work that we don't have to repeat when we're carrying out our own survey. Heritage commissions can coordinate activities with appropriate service organizations and nonprofit groups. And I'll call out historical societies again as a great way to collaborate, but nominating buildings or projects or people for 7 to Save or for statewide preservation awards is a great thing for heritage commissions to do. We gave the Preservation Alliance gave a statewide award to the Girl Scouts in Wolfeboro, who actively and successfully campaigned for a town-funded study on the reuse of an old electrical plant as a community center. And that passed. Everybody loved seeing these young people getting involved in preservation, and that was worthy of an award. So it, again, gave a boost to the visibility of preservation efforts in our community. Heritage commissions can hire consultants and contractors as needed. We proposed and organized with the planning board a Plan New Hampshire charrette to explore ideas for reuse of several key downtown buildings to improve walkability, add housing, and save and reuse vacant or underutilized structures. We We started with a budget of $500, and this year I've upped it to $1,000, but clearly with a Plan New Hampshire charrette and a price tag of about $12,000, the town was very happy that we offered to raise half the money, and we did that. So when you raise money, you can spend money. It's great. Heritage commissions can receive gifts of money or property in the name of the city or town. Relating to our charrette, we got donations of supplies and food to feed the charrette team. And then another example is we found a graphic designer to donate part of the cost for designing us a logo that we wanted to use to brand ourselves. This year, we might spring for a banner using our logo and our name for when we do public events. Property. If your Heritage Commission wants to own and manage buildings or hold preservation easements on buildings, this section is for you. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can read it. I would say at the 101 level, owning property is probably not something your Heritage Commission wants to attempt to do. You're purchasing things in the name of the town, subject to the local governing body's approval. The Wakefield Heritage Commission probably is the outstanding example of groups that have done this. On the left is the Garvin building, which they purchased, rehabbed, and eventually sold at a nice profit, enabling them to take on the ownership and preservation efforts of other buildings, including the railroad station in the village of Union that they now operate as a museum. So they're very focused on the buildings they own and operating museum properties, museum type properties. So how do you create a Heritage Commission? Interested citizens come together to create a coalition of support, and that's where having a successful preservation project happen in your community or some related thing is a great way to plant the seed and nurture a group of people who might want to take on creation of a Heritage Commission. You put a warrant article on the ballot, or if you're a city form of government, you make a request to City Council. If that's successful, up to 7 members and 5 alternates are appointed. You have to have at least 3. You can't have more than 7. The alternates are a great way to have new members in waiting and build support throughout the community, welcome new members, etc. Then the Heritage Commission members draft and adopt their official rules of procedure and regulations. We promised that we would talk to you about timing. While many towns right now are putting the finishing touches on warrant articles for town voting in March, that would mean, and we're an SB2 town, so I know what our regs are, it has to be in by the beginning of December. In towns that still hold town meetings, you should check with your town clerk and find out how late you can do a warrant article. The Board of Selectmen can help you write a warrant article, or you could submit a petition warrant article with just 25 signatures. The timeline is more flexible if you're submitting a request to City Council. I can give you the statutes if you'd like for what these deadlines are, but the best rule of thumb would be to talk to the town clerk. And of course, in some towns, they don't have typical voting on the 2nd Tuesday in March. So find out locally. Get to have your face known at your town offices. As you're trying to get a Heritage Commission adopted and get some traction, you want to mount an information campaign. Prepare materials and messages to inform your constituents about the Heritage Commission. Have those prominently displayed in the town offices. Create a web page on the town's website for yourself. Have materials there. Make sure you address misconceptions in a clear way and keep your messaging positive. Tell a story that illustrates the value of what you do, even if it's borrowed from another town and you're brand new. Toot your own horn. Make sure you thank voters and be responsible to keep voters informed if your warrant article is passed. And if it doesn't pass, figure out why, talk to people and try again. A little bit about meetings. These are subject to all state rules, right to know laws, etc. And you'll follow the protocols that the town has set up, post notice of meetings a week in advance, send out an agenda a week or more in advance, send minutes a week following the meeting. When in doubt, ask someone at the town hall. We're fortunate enough to have a very experienced person on our commission who is up to speed on all the inner workings of town government. And it's great to have her. We meet once a month. We take our own minutes. We include time for public input on every agenda, which is required. And we sometimes take a month off in the summer or any month that we really don't have any pressing business. Speaking of public input, we often invite guests to come to our meetings and share concerns about a particular topic. Last night's meetings, for instance, we had 2 people from a neighborhood association who wanted to let us know how much they care about preserving rural character. You can also hold meetings off-site. This is a photograph of one we held at the American Legion. They own a historic schoolhouse that they wanted to rehabilitate, and we helped them get started, and we familiarized ourselves with a resource in town that many people had never seen. Last year, we held a joint meeting with the Historical Society at their building. You also might want to meet or otherwise work with the Conservation Commission, the Energy Commission, the Agriculture Commission, Economic Development Committee, Chamber, Public Works Department. There are a lot of overlaps in what you want to do and what other people in the town might be doing. Members. The statute also covers the areas of expertise Heritage Commission members should have. We are always in recruiting mode. We almost always have available alternate slots. And for people who want to find out more about what the Heritage Commission is and does, we encourage them to come to a meeting, to submit a resume if they want to be formally considered, talk to them or share the requirements that will be in the follow-up materials that I'm sending out to you. And make sure that you're getting someone who really adds to the expertise of your commission. Typically, Heritage Commissions have a representative from the Board of Selectmen. We struggle to get that person to attend meetings, but we always keep them informed. We have a planning board rep. We have a representative from the Historical Society. And as chair, I try to keep everyone engaged. We consult our menu of options and do a plan of work at the beginning of the year, figure out what people would like to work on. And so those are the things that move forward on the list of what we're doing. And always follow up with people who show an interest in your work or an affinity for your work. One requirement of members is that they have to be residents of the community, full-time residents. My best advice is start simply because you're going to start slowly. As I said, introduce yourselves to other boards, visit other historic resources, build up some pages on your town website with information about when your meetings are and how to get in touch with you. Offer to help when you hear of a need, and work with partners. One of our first projects was finding a new owner and home for the town's old information booth. That's the top picture. We managed the process to find it one, although it went out of town because we couldn't find anyone local who could take it on and promise to rehabilitate it. One of the second things we took on was helping the selectmen monitor barn easements, as I mentioned. We write an annual summary of those easements and present it in person to the Board of Selectmen. So again, we're getting visibility in front of them and showing our value to the community. Ask for a budget. I mentioned this before. Don't promise that, oh, this won't cost anything to the town, because you will find that you really do need some money. Use it. Ask for more money the next year if you have greater needs. We get funding, initially we got funding through the town budget rather than a line item, and I was cautioned that it's great to just be in the general budget, because if you have a line item, then that's something people can pick on and say, we want to reduce that one. So we fly under the radar a little bit. Some heritage commissions, all heritage commissions can create a separate heritage fund for their projects or activities. And the town of Stratham has probably been the best at doing this. And they have a heritage fund that's big enough that when a historic property comes on the market and they feel it's really important to buy it, they do. They have the money to do that. You can also solicit donations or receive gifts that are tax deductible as long as they're going to your activities. So with the budget, you can build visibility in what you do and communicate the benefits of your activities better. Learn the tools and how to apply them. And I've just listed some of the many preservation tools that are in use in this state. And if you develop expertise, then you can advise others and promote these opportunities. The community will benefit if you bring forward positive, good suggestions of what to do. Gee, did you know you could get a Moose Plate grant to repair the clock in town? Did you know that LCHIP will fund preservation of important cultural landscapes and land acquisition? Did you know that there's something called RSA 79E, which is the downtown tax incentive that was used to rehab a historic house in our community? Did you know that there is something between a regulatory historic district and non-regulatory architectural guidelines, and that's a neighborhood heritage district? So learn the tools and how to apply them. I will send you links to our preservation planning handbook, and that's where you can begin to educate yourself about what these tools are. One of the first things I did was to buy a copy of the Alliance's preservation planning handbook and give a copy to every member on the Heritage Commission. And I hope they read it every night. Take on activities that seem right for your community. And as I said, we built slowly, but last year in our 9th year perhaps, we took on doing preservation awards in our community. Other towns might do state register nominations. Other towns might do a lecture series or tours of important places. You might do a window repair workshop for homeowners. Stratham participates in the Old Home Day Parade, in addition to its other accomplishments. With our local awards program, we modeled it after the Alliance's statewide one and what they do in the city of Manchester. It was a huge success. It surprised me. We have now given out 7 preservation awards. We're talking about doing it again next May. We have put into a package that we can share with other towns everything that we did to create a townwide preservation awards program. It might be great for other communities to take a look at that and see if that's something that would be a lovely boost for what the preservation community is accomplishing, and give the Heritage Commission more visibility as well. So send an email to us if you'd like to get those materials. I guess that's all I want to say about that. Here are some words of wisdom from planners and others who really understand how important it is to have good relationships in your community and to address identified needs and in a positive way. Promote adaptive reuse as another form of recycling. Save money, materials, energy, and save character. This is great, and this is a really timely message. When I started using this, it was 12 years ago, and people weren't so concerned with climate change and sustainability as they are now, but that's a real selling point for your commission. If the town has an ethic of preservation and the benefits are evident, others will step up to support it. So you don't have to do everything, but if you give an award to a business that did a wonderful job of rehabbing a historic building, or to a family who rehabbed a home, or to an individual who might have been active for years in the community supporting its character and heritage, then that's great. That builds awareness and goodwill. Acknowledging history gives newcomers a way to connect to the town. We have a very active newcomers club in our town, and it's not just newcomers who go there, but that's a way for a partnership where we might offer tours of historic resources in town to the newcomers club. Last night, we had a newcomer come to our meeting who said, I'm interested in history and preservation. I want to see what this is all about. Been in town a month. Kudos to Howard. That was great. Use GIS or other mapping tools to give all town boards access to historical information. This obviously is an outgrowth of the survey work that you have done, but I have seen towns that have a mapping layer for their GIS system that clearly identifies the age of a house and whether or not it's designated in some way as a historic resource. And so that's something to aspire to. We're nowhere near there yet, but we'd love to be. Review and reflect annually on your work as a commission and set achievable goals for the coming year. I can't stress this enough. It's easy to just have a year slip away and feel like, maybe we haven't done that much this year. But the town asks me every year to write a summary of what we did for the annual town report. And I realized very quickly that people were going to read this, people were going to pay attention, and to make that sound as meaty and useful as possible. We also created a Facebook page. I can't tell you how many followers we have, but it's also very well read and shared, and a positive for us. And somebody on our committee loves being the administrator of that site. Is good with technology, so we have good support through that. As I mentioned, there are a lot of resources out there. There's a chapter on heritage commissions from our Preserving Community Character Handbook that is available to download on our website, and the whole printed book can be purchased through our store, which is also on our website. As I said, I bought copies for all of our members. I would encourage Heritage Commission members to attend conferences and programs, not just of the Alliance, but the Office of Planning and Development, for instance. The Division of Historical Resources sends out a newsletter. Subscribe to that. These things are free. And get to know people from other towns that have heritage commissions and learn from them too. Our town formed with others in the Lakes region a little ad hoc group so that we could get together every year or two. COVID set us back a little bit. But each town would host and talk about the projects that they had been doing in their town and the issues that they were seeing in their community. And we all had a chance to meet others who could then be sounding boards for us or mentors for a particular project that we wanted to do. I acknowledge that Wolfeboro is a community that's a tourist town and that may have an advantage in this regard. We easily passed the warrant article on creating a heritage commission, and I think people quickly understood the importance of preserving community character. So I may not be sharing examples that will work for your community, but I hope you found some wisdom and ideas in what we've done, what I've shared today, so that your heritage efforts are understood and appreciated and can benefit your community. And we have time for questions and lots of expertise in the audience. So I am happy to take questions. Thank you all for listening, and now thank you for participating and sharing your thoughts. Share what you do in your town. Share what your organization is all about. We're all here to learn.
Great. Thank you, Maggie. I have a few questions that have come in, but I'll start asking those, but feel free to direct them into the chat, either for everyone to see or directed specifically to me. One of the questions is, what size town should consider a heritage commission? Is there a population where it just doesn't make sense?
There's a Heritage Commission in Manchester, which is the biggest city in the state. So on the high end, I don't think there should be any constraints. I think in really small communities, a Heritage Commission may have a lot of overlap with other town boards and committees. And there may be something already in place that is doing the job of a Heritage Commission without that name. I'm thinking of the Effingham Preservation Society, I believe it's called, and they are an independent group, but functioning as a Heritage Commission. And so that small town is getting the benefit of this kinds of work without having a formal Heritage Commission.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth noting that Shelburne and Errol both have heritage commissions, and their populations are under 500. So I guess it does depend on the community. I guess it's also worth noting that I think Berlin's the only city that doesn't have a heritage commission in New Hampshire. So,
thank you.
All right. I have one more question. Asking, is a conservation commission an apt comparison to a heritage commission?
Yes, for the most part. Although conservation commissions generally have an income stream, which is land being taken out of current use that they can then use to purchase other properties. But in many ways, yes, they are advocates for conservation in the community. Maybe you have something to add to that, Andrew, or someone else does as well. Energy commissions, agricultural commissions, everybody has a little bit of a different charge under the statute of what they can and cannot do, which is why I took this approach of what we can do. So
we'll go to Tony and Hooksett.
Yeah, my question is, Maggie, do you in Wolfeboro do you have a demo regulation permit process for Wolfeboro?
We do not. And we have spoken with the codes officer to see if at least he would let us know if he receives, and the planning board, if they receive word that a building will be demolished, but we have not tackled that yet. We have talked about it. We may try to tackle that sometime soon. Do you have experience with that, Tony? You might want to just speak to that.
Yeah, so we do have one in Hooksett. We have a demolition permit regulation in Hooksett. It's been in place for a very long time. I became the chair back in 21, and we've had a couple regulations that have come, or properties that have come in, and we are looking to actually revise the permit process in our town, because it was stated that it was 5 days for from when a permit comes into the town. The chair would then receive the demolition permit. And what Hooksett currently has is any property that is 50 years of age or older, and the property owner is requesting for it to be demolished, then the property owner has to fill out a demolition permit, which is a simple form that the town has. And then the town then submits it to the chair of the Heritage Commission, so me, and then we would then go and determine within 5 days from receipt of that permit if we do find that there is historical significance for that property, which we have found that to be able to find historical significance within 5 days is a little bit tough. So we're looking to change that regulation. And so I'm actually, maybe I might want to talk to Andrew a little bit after about that, because that's something that we're looking to change, because for us to have to meet in person and find historical significance within 5 days is tough. That's the current regulation, and I believe that's a pretty formal standard across communities in the state. So that's kind of the process. We just find if there's historical significance. If there isn't, then we check it off. I sign off on the permit, and then the property owner then goes and demolishes it. If we do find there's historical significance, then we have, I believe, 12 days to hold a public hearing, and then the community can come in and voice their opinion. Basically, once that happens, the property owner does not have to not demolish the property because it is their property. It's basically a delay. It's just it's a delay from a demolition. At least that's my understanding of it. But I found that the chairwoman prior to me, she has been very successful with the demolition permit process in delaying that, and actually using that system to save properties in town.
Well, that's what the demolition delay ordinance is supposed to do. And typically they're 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. Even 30 days is not much time. And you want the delay to explore alternatives to demolition. That's exactly what Wolfeboro did with the freight house, for instance. And I asked for a year, and that was lovely to have that amount of time to get the town to hold off on demolition. Private owners may not be so cooperative, but you never know. And even with a delay, I've seen instances where a building is being demolished and a replacement building is going up in its place, and you can have influence on what that building looks like. You can document the structure that's being torn down if you have a delay of adequate length. So there are other options.
A quick idea about that is, the conservation commissions get the land use change taxes from properties leaving current use, and it goes into their conservation fund. I don't know if it's a good idea in Live Free or Die, New Hampshire, but to have some sort of X% of the value of historic properties that are determined significant go to the Heritage Fund.
That are demolished.
Correct, yeah.
I think that would require a state statute enabling.
It would require, yeah. Any state reps in the group? Yeah.
But David has had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, I wanted to tell Tony that he could look at the Rye Demolition Review Ordinance. I chair that committee. We actually dramatically overhauled it a couple of years ago because the timetable that we had was not that realistic. We now have a 49-day window. I don't know how the original window, but we basically tied everything to business days. So we have 10 business days to meet and discuss the application, and then without getting into the details of the ordinance, we've never gone 49 days. But the other thing we have in the ordinance, which you might want to think about, is we have it if more than 500 square feet is being demolished, then we get involved with that as well. It's not just the whole building. It's more than 50 years old, 50 years or older, and more than 500 square feet, because somebody could have a historic building and they just want to take off the family room or something, and it's 500 square feet, and we want to get involved in that. We haven't had a great deal of success in talking people out of it, although we've had a couple of. We also use a preservation consultant on a pro bono basis, Steve Bedard from Bedard Preservation, on something significant. He's willing to come over and just give us his opinion, which may or may not be the same as the owners. The problem you have with demolition review is owners contractors want to do the cheapest and easiest thing possible, and they'll always tell the owner, well, it's much cheaper to tear it down and build new than it is to restore it, and that's really not a true statement. So, but Tony, if you want to take a look at, I think, a pretty good ordinance, take a look at the Rye one.
I would also say I don't want to spend too much more time on demolition review ordinances, but I want to thank David and also say that there have been some instances where the cost of demolition, if you can avoid demolition, the cost that the building owner might have spent on demolition could go toward a solution. back in 2006, when I was brand new with the Preservation Alliance, I worked with the town of Epsom that wanted to acquire a church that was slated for demolition to make way for a gas station. And the gas station agreed to contribute the costs of that they would have paid for demolition toward moving the building. And that happened. And you will see that church along Route 4 sitting next to the public library. It's not 100% a success story, but I hope it's on its way to being reused. So sometimes that can happen.
Yeah, and in Belmont, they negotiated for the cost of demolition for Gale School to go into the relocation of Gale School, and that was a $75,000 credit, I believe.
Call us. That's what I want to say. If there is a demolition of an important building that your town is facing, please call us. We can't say we can always help, but we can often bring our expertise and connections to help in that process. And we've done that a lot. Other questions?
Yeah, David Clark in Bedford asks, essentially, if the Historic District Commission already exists, what are the pros and cons to adding a Heritage Commission, or merging, or not, if to adding a Heritage Commission to that existing body?
Boy, I guess I would answer that by saying, is there work that needs to be done that that Historic District Commission is not doing that you feel would be a benefit in your community? Bedford is a pretty good sized community. There may be enough volunteers to support a separate group. Don't know how active the Historical Society is or how much overlap there might be with their activities, but I would say give us a call, and maybe that's worth just setting up a conversation with Andrew and me and maybe somebody else from a town that has a Heritage Commission combined with a Historic District Commission. We could talk it through with you.
Yeah, and I would just say, you know, an HDC has a boundary, and within that boundary, you have regulatory control. Heritage Commission allows you kind of a town lens for non-regulatory items, but maybe there are things you want to weigh in on a more general town-wide level.
Thank you very much.
I have another question here, just asking more specifics about a heritage fund. And is it automatically created? Does the town have to vote on its creation? How are they generally funded?
That's a really good question. I believe it is funded by town appropriation. That's what Stratum did. They just got the town to set aside money. And if you know Stratum, you know that heritage preservation has not been in the forefront for forever, and they've lost a lot of historic resources. So I think the town really felt strongly about working to save what they could before too much more was lost. I am not up to speed on heritage funds. I have not created one. Maybe there's somebody else here who can speak to that. You might get a big gift. What?
Maybe David has Heritage Fund.
Yeah, we just talked about this in Rye the other night, because we need to find a way to renovate, restore our town hall, which we saved with cooperation of New Hampshire Preservation Alliance a few years ago, but it hasn't been restored, and the selectmen haven't been putting any money in the budget. So we discussed, and I think this is the way it has to be done. It has to, in our case, we're going to put money starting, hopefully not this year's warrant, but the one after it, into CIP, capital improvement plan.
Oh.
So if it's $1 million renovation, restoration, whatever it is, we'll divide it up into 3 or 4 years and put that into the budget, because towns really now, they're doing that really for dump trucks, fire engines, police cars, and everything else. So what's the difference of whether you have a significant municipally owned building that needs to be restored and just start saving for it, and basically maybe you do things piecemeal. We haven't gotten that far yet, but I think you have to do it in the CIP. Now we're meeting with Becky Mitchell and David Canada from Stratum's Heritage Commission in December to find out what they do. They get $50,000 a year from the town to be used towards preservation projects, and it's a budget item in the town budget. So if you have a small number, that's probably the way to do it. Just get it into the budget committee and make the case that, hey, we need this for the same way that you put money into, maintain the town hall in Wolfeboro, Maggie. They put in, $50,000 to maintain historic structures in the town of Wolfeboro. just using it as an example. So that's but for a major project, I think the CIP, and then you can marry that money with, LCHIP or other grant applications.
Well, a heritage fund that is designated for the Heritage Commission to spend has to have a public hearing about creating it, and it's subject to approval by the town governing body. But then you don't have to go back to the town meeting or citywide balloting to buy property and easements. So you can spend that money however you wish. And if you're renovating a town building, it might be better to do it through a more transparent process than having the Heritage Commission control how that money gets spent.
Thanks.
It's just one observation. Other questions?
There's another one in the chat. There's another one in the chat, Maggie.
Okay.
Kathleen from Bedford asks, what are the benefits and challenges of regulating trees within the historic district? Are you aware of any model regulations addressing this topic?
So you're talking about historic district regulations again. I'm going to deflect that. I know that within neighborhood heritage districts, which is a relatively new regulatory tool, and only in use in one town, as far as I know, Stratham again. Things like trees can be regulated. I think there is typically a tree warden in most towns, and it would behoove the Heritage Commission or Historic District Commission to talk to the tree warden and see what local ordinances there might be about regulation of trees. There are state ordinances about stone walls, for instance. There can be local ones as well. There can be, in a neighborhood heritage district, you can regulate fences and other landscape features that might not be as significant as telling people what they can do with their buildings, but can maintain a sense of openness to a landscape that's valuable to the community. So I think each town is going to have to make these decisions on their own.
I can think of the Danville Historic District Commission used to, until this year, include the town forest in their Historic District Commission. And I think some of those powers have been stripped away at town meeting because there was tension and misunderstanding about how the Historic District Commission regulated the town forest. That's kind of trees at a big scale. But I believe
I remember something with the Durham Heritage Commission too about tree planting. So
yeah, it's going to be at the
give those towns a call. Anybody else on the subject of trees? It's typically not regulated, but if there's a scenic road designation which a town can make, then you can regulate things like that a little bit more readily.
That's the end of
do we have someone from DHR here? I think we do, and I would love to have them weigh in a little bit.
I know Amy and Brandy are on.
Yeah. I'd love to just have you introduce yourselves and talk about your role in all of this.
Sure, I'll go first. This is Brandy Laughlin. I'm the Preservation Development Coordinator at the Division of Historical Resources. And I oversee the Certified Local Government Program, the Federal Historic Tax Credit Program, and I do preservation planning, just kind of advisory things for the office.
Okay, you've named a couple of tools that were on my list. If people want to know more about those things, I would say talk to Brandy, go on the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources website to learn more about them, but they can be very helpful incentives for property owners that may want to rehabilitate a historic property. We had a big white elephant in our community that was in foreclosure. And by convening a meeting of kind of the movers and shakers in the community and bringing someone up from the Division of Historical Resources. They were made aware of the federal tax credit opportunity, the local 79E tax incentive, and were able to better put together a package to actually find a developer who would want to rehabilitate this building rather than having it torn down. Amy?
Hi. Yeah, I'm Amy Dixon. I'm the Community Preservation Coordinator with the DHR. I work with Brandy on the Certified Local Government Program, mostly managing the grant side of that program. And I also manage the Moose Plate grant program. So I do work with a lot of towns and heritage commissions who are working to restore their local landmarks.
Can you just talk a little bit about what Moose Plate is and what CLG is?
I'm going to defer CLG to Brandy. But yes, so quickly, Moose Plate, it is the money from the sale of the Moose license plate. We get a small portion of that for our office, and we offer annual grants to municipalities for municipally owned historic buildings. The maximum grant is up to $20,000. There is no match required, which is enticing to a lot of communities. They don't have to come to the table with money, and it's an opportunity for them to do those kind of smaller scale projects. But if you're looking at a bigger project, it's also beneficial because it can be used as match for other grant programs like LCHIP and other things. So.
Great, thank you. And the CLG program, I'm just going to jump in here. Unless you have a regulatory historic district in your community, you're not eligible to become a certified local government. And that's a hurdle that for many communities is difficult. It's more typical for larger cities to be part of CLG, but not exclusively. And they do have a grant program, which can be very helpful in implementing things like survey, which otherwise you might have to raise money to hire someone to do, or other preservation planning tools. Brandy, do you want to add anything to that quick summary?
Yes, sorry, I just had to step away briefly. I had a contractor here. So yeah, the Certified Local Government Program is a pretty robust program here in New Hampshire. We do have 29 communities now, which is a pretty good number for our size state. I think Massachusetts has 25, so we're beating them. We always love to hear that. And if any communities have questions about the program, please feel free to reach out to me. Just to reiterate what Maggie said, though, that the biggest qualifying feature that a community does have to have is a regulated historic district. And so that's your traditional local historic district that's overseen by a board. And unfortunately, the neighborhood heritage districts don't count, which you will have seen my response in the chat. But if you do have a local historic district or you're thinking about creating one and you have questions about the CLG program, please reach out to me.
Great. Have any of you attended a conference where you learned more about your work as a historic district commissioner? And would you share what resources you found particularly helpful? Or if you haven't come to a conference or other sessions like this, what resources do you need? The Preservation Alliance would love to know what would be most helpful to you. So put that in the chat or put that in your evaluation at the end of the program. We try to be responsive and help people on the local level as much as possible. And if you've worked with us at all, you probably know Andrew as well, who's the field service person, and have found him very helpful. So I just want to say thank you. And I think Andrew has some concluding remarks. Is that correct?
Let me find out. Yeah, I think just reiterating that the Preservation Alliance is here to help. So hopefully a phone call to us if you're considering a Heritage Commission, or you are an existing Heritage Commission but need some help getting through some hurdles. Give us a call. We will be doing a follow-up email about today's recordings. So this will be recorded, so you can watch it later or share with some other Heritage Commission minded folks. Maggie, what else should I say?
We hope you'll support our work.
Yeah.
We're entering the annual fund season. We offer these programs for free. Our field services are free, but we are largely reliant on individual donations to keep doing what we're doing. And we hope you find value in that and that you will want to continue to support us or support us for the first time. We'd be very grateful. I think that's it. Don't forget Chris Skelly's presentation next Tuesday. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Thanks a lot for signing on.